Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the complete story of the Titanic, the legendary ocean liner that was once called unsinkable. If you enjoy peaceful history that helps you relax and fall asleep, don't forget to subscribe to the channel before you close your eyes. Now settle into a comfortable position, take a slow breath, and let your imagination travel back to the spring of 1912, before the disaster became one of the world's most famous tragedies. The Titanic represented hope, ambition, and human confidence. Built by thousands of skilled workers, the enormous ship stood as a symbol of modern engineering, with elegant dining rooms, luxurious cabins, and powerful engines hidden deep below its decks. Newspapers praised it as the greatest passenger ship ever created, while families dreamed of crossing the Atlantic aboard what many believed was the safest vessel ever built. Wealthy businessmen, immigrants searching for a better future, newly married couples, adventurous travelers, musicians, cooks, engineers, and children all gathered at the docks, each carrying different dreams but sharing the same destination. As the morning sun rose over Southampton, excitement filled the air. Porters hurried across the pier with heavy luggage. Whistles echoed through the harbor, and the smell of coal mixed with the cool sea breeze. Some passengers paused for one last photograph, smiling without knowing that those images would become famous more than a century later. Others waved goodbye to parents and friends standing on the dock, believing they would meet again within only a few weeks. Crew members carefully prepared every part of the ship, checking ropes, lifeboats, kitchens, engines, and cabins. Far below the polished wooden decks, stokers shoveled enormous amounts of coal into giant furnaces that powered the massive steam engines. Their work was hot, exhausting, and endless. While above them, wealthy guests admired grand staircases decorated with carved wood, shining brass, and beautiful glass domes. First-class passengers enjoyed luxurious suites that felt more like expensive hotels than cabins on a ship. Fine china rested neatly on dining tables, fresh flowers decorated elegant rooms, and soft carpets covered the hallways. Meanwhile, second-class travelers looked forward to comfortable accommodations that were considered excellent for the time, while third-class families were simply grateful for a chance to begin a new life across the ocean. For many of them, this voyage was not a vacation, but the start of an entirely new future. As the ropes were released and the giant ship slowly moved away from the harbor, cheers erupted from the crowd. Handkerchiefs waved through the air. Ship horns echoed across the water. And the Titanic gracefully began its maiden voyage toward New York. Few people could imagine that this peaceful departure would later become one of history's most remembered moments. For now, everything seemed calm, hopeful, and full of endless possibility. The Titanic's first hours at sea were remarkably peaceful. The powerful engines settled into a steady rhythm, sending a gentle vibration through the enormous ship as it sailed across the English Channel. Passengers explored every corner with curiosity, eager to see the vessel that newspapers had described as the greatest achievement of the modern age. Children laughed while running along the open decks, stopping only to watch the endless waves stretching toward the horizon. Elderly couples wrapped themselves in warm coats as they enjoyed the cool spring air, while photographers captured smiling families standing proudly beside the gleaming white railings. Inside the ship, stewards politely guided guests to their cabins, answered countless questions, and made sure everyone felt comfortable. Every hallway smelled of polished wood and fresh linen, giving the ship the atmosphere of a luxurious floating hotel rather than a simple means of transportation. In first class, breakfast was served with silver cutlery, elegant china, and freshly baked bread. Wealthy travelers discussed business opportunities, politics, literature, and the future of technology while musicians quietly performed nearby. Some spent hours reading books in the magnificent library, while others relaxed in comfortable lounges filled with sunlight pouring through large windows. Ladies wearing fashionable dresses strolled along the promenade deck, protected from the wind by glass screens, while gentlemen admired the calm ocean and confidently spoke about how modern engineering had conquered the dangers of the sea. Far below these luxurious spaces, life looked very different. Hundreds of crew members worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Engineers carefully monitored gauges and machinery that never rested. Firemen shoveled coal into roaring furnaces hour after hour, their faces covered with sweat and black dust, despite the cool weather above deck. Cooks prepared thousands of meals every single day, while bakers filled kitchens with the comforting aroma of warm bread and pastries before sunrise. In third class, families from Ireland, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and many other regions gathered together in shared spaces, exchanging stories about the lives they hoped to build in America. Some dreamed of owning farms. Others planned to join relatives who had already crossed the Atlantic, and many simply hoped their children would have opportunities they themselves had never known. Although their cabins were simple compared with first class, many passengers considered them cleaner and more comfortable than anything they had experienced before. As each day passed, the vast Atlantic appeared peaceful and almost endless. The sea often looked as smooth as polished glass beneath the bright spring sky, making it difficult for anyone aboard to imagine that danger could be hiding somewhere beyond the horizon. High above the silent ocean, the lookouts climbed into the crow's nest, scanning the darkness ahead with nothing but their eyes, unaware that before the night was over, they would witness the moment that would forever change the story of the Titanic. The night grew colder with every passing minute. Most passengers had already returned to their cabins after an ordinary Sunday evening, believing that tomorrow would simply bring another peaceful day at sea. Some read books beneath soft electric lamps before drifting to sleep, while others quietly talked with family members about the exciting arrival in New York that was now only days away. In first class, the grand dining room had emptied, the orchestra had finished performing, and long hallways became calm except for the footsteps of late-night stewards, checking that everything remained in perfect order. Far below, however, the engine rooms were still alive with heat, noise, and endless movement. Firemen continued shoveling coal into blazing furnaces as giant pistons pushed the ship steadily westward through the dark Atlantic. Above them, the bridge remained alert. Captain Edward Smith had retired for the evening after, leaving instructions to be informed if conditions changed, while senior officers continued their watch with quiet confidence. High above the decks, the two lookouts stood inside the crow's nest, surrounded by freezing air. They had no binoculars available, relying only on their eyesight as they searched the black horizon. The sea was strangely calm, almost like polished glass, and the moonless sky made the ocean appear even darker than usual. Stars glittered brilliantly overhead, but without moonlight the water blended into the night, making distant objects extremely difficult to distinguish. Every few moments the lookouts swept their eyes across the horizon again and again, hoping to spot anything unusual before it came too close. Minutes passed in complete silence except for the steady sound of the ship cutting through the icy water. Then, at approximately 11:40 p.m., one lookout suddenly noticed something directly ahead. At first, it appeared as a dark shadow rising from the darkness itself. Within seconds, the shape became clearer. It was an enormous iceberg, towering above the surface and lying directly in the Titanic's path. The lookout immediately struck the warning bell 3 times, the agreed signal for danger ahead, before reaching for the telephone connecting the crow's nest to the bridge. His urgent message was brief and unforgettable. Iceberg, right ahead, on the bridge. Officers reacted instantly. Orders were shouted to turn the ship as quickly as possible while commands were sent to slow the engines. The massive liner began responding, but everyone understood one difficult truth. A ship of such extraordinary size could not change direction in an instant. In the next few moments, the fate of the Titanic would depend on whether there was enough distance left between the world's largest passenger ship and the silent wall of ice emerging from the darkness. The officers had only seconds to respond. The order to turn the ship was carried out immediately, and the Titanic slowly began swinging away from the looming iceberg. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that the enormous liner might avoid disaster altogether. Many passengers, sleeping peacefully in their cabins, noticed nothing unusual. Others felt only a gentle change in motion, hardly enough to cause concern. Then came a faint scraping sound, followed by a slight vibration that traveled through the length of the ship. It was not the violent crash people would later imagine. Instead, the iceberg brushed along the starboard side, tearing open several sections of the hull below the waterline. Huge sheets of steel bent inward as icy seawater rushed into the forward compartments. On the bridge, officers quickly realized the collision had been more serious than it first appeared. Captain Smith was awakened and hurried back to assess the situation. Shipbuilder Thomas Andrews, who was traveling aboard the Titanic, joined the captain in inspecting the damaged areas. As engineers measured the flooding, the truth became impossible to ignore. The Titanic had been designed with watertight compartments that were expected to keep the ship afloat even if several were damaged. But the iceberg had opened too many compartments at once. Water poured from one section into the next, steadily climbing higher as the bow settled deeper into the freezing Atlantic. After carefully reviewing the reports, Andrews quietly delivered the conclusion no one wanted to hear. The ship could not be saved. It would remain afloat for only a limited number of hours before sinking completely. Captain Smith listened in silence, understanding the enormous responsibility now resting on his shoulders. He immediately ordered the crew to prepare the lifeboats and awaken the passengers. At first, many people were confused rather than frightened. The ship still appeared stable, the lights remained on, and the engines had stopped so smoothly that few believed anything truly dangerous had happened. Some passengers even returned to their cabins for warmer clothing, jewelry, or personal belongings, thinking they would soon return after a precautionary evacuation. Stewards calmly knocked on doors, politely asking everyone to put on life jackets and make their way to the boat deck. The orchestra members quietly gathered their instruments, continuing to play gentle music that helped prevent panic from spreading. Above, the night remained astonishingly beautiful. Countless stars filled the sky while the calm sea reflected them like a mirror, creating a peaceful scene that stood in heartbreaking contrast to the emergency unfolding aboard the Titanic. Slowly, almost unnoticed at first, the boat continued sinking lower into the icy water, confirming that every passing minute was becoming more precious than the last. Crew members worked quickly but calmly, following the captain's orders with remarkable discipline. Their first priority was to uncover the lifeboats, prepare them for launching, and guide passengers safely onto the boat deck. According to long-standing maritime custom, women and children were given priority. Many families struggled to understand what was happening. Husbands reassured their wives that they would join them later, believing another rescue ship would soon arrive. Mothers wrapped blankets around sleeping children, carrying them into the freezing night while trying to remain calm despite the growing uncertainty. Some passengers hesitated to step into the lifeboats at all. Looking around, they saw a brightly lit ship that still appeared strong and stable. The decks remained level enough to walk comfortably. The electric lights continued glowing, and the orchestra quietly played cheerful melodies that helped maintain a sense of order. To many people, climbing into a small wooden boat suspended high above the dark Atlantic seemed far more frightening than staying aboard the enormous liner. Because of this hesitation, several of the first lifeboats left the Titanic carrying far fewer people than they were designed to hold. Officers repeatedly encouraged passengers to board, explaining that it was only a precaution, but not everyone believed the danger was real. Meanwhile, below the waterline, the situation worsened with every passing minute. Engineers and crew members fought tirelessly against the flooding, closing watertight doors and operating pumps at full capacity. Despite their efforts, the icy seawater continued rising through the damaged compartments. The bow settled lower, and the slight forward tilt became easier to notice. In the wireless room, operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride remained at their equipment, sending urgent distress calls into the night. Again and again they transmitted messages asking nearby ships to come immediately. Their signals traveled across the Atlantic, reaching several vessels, including the RMS Carpathia, whose captain instantly ordered his ship to race toward the Titanic at maximum speed. Yet the Carpathia was many miles away, and everyone aboard knew the rescue would take precious hours. Time was slipping away. On deck, the cold became even more intense as passengers waited beside the remaining lifeboats. Their breath formed small clouds in the icy air, while the silence of the ocean was interrupted only by orders from officers, the creaking of ropes, and the distant splash of lifeboats touching the water. Little by little, the once celebrated ship that had been called unsinkable continued sinking deeper into the Atlantic, and the growing angle of the deck made it increasingly clear that the moment everyone had hoped would never come was drawing closer. By now, the Titanic's bow had sunk noticeably deeper into the freezing Atlantic, and even those who had remained calm could no longer ignore the change. Walking across, the decks became slightly more difficult as the ship slowly tilted forward. Crew members continued helping passengers toward the remaining lifeboats, repeating the same instructions with steady voices despite knowing how little time remained. Officers carefully maintained order, determined to prevent panic from spreading through the thousands of people still aboard. The musicians continued performing gentle melodies, their music drifting through the cold night air. Whether every song later remembered was actually played has been debated by historians, but there is little doubt that the orchestra remained at its post for a remarkable length of time, offering comfort when fear threatened to take over. Nearby, stewards handed out life jackets, comforted frightened children, and helped elderly passengers walk across the increasingly sloping decks. In many places, strangers offered one another quiet words of encouragement. Some families embraced for what would unknowingly become the final time, while others searched desperately through the growing crowds, hoping to find loved ones before another lifeboat was lowered away. Below deck, the engineers refused to abandon their stations. They understood that keeping electricity flowing for as long as possible would allow lights, pumps, and wireless equipment to continue operating, giving everyone above a better chance of survival. Surrounded by rising seawater and deafening machinery, they continued working with extraordinary determination. Their efforts bought valuable time for the evacuation, even though many knew they would never leave the ship themselves. In the wireless room, distress calls continued without pause. Every message carried the desperate hope that another vessel might arrive before it was too late. Far away across the dark Atlantic, the Carpathia pushed its engines to their limits, racing through icy waters toward the reported position of the Titanic. Its captain ordered extra lookouts because the same dangerous ice field that had doomed the Titanic now lay directly in his own path. Back aboard the sinking liner, the final lifeboats were nearly gone. The once bright decks had become quieter, replaced by the sounds of rushing water, creaking metal, and the cold wind blowing across. The open ocean, the bow continued slipping lower, while the stern slowly lifted higher into the night sky, what had begun only a few hours earlier as a luxurious voyage across the Atlantic had become one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. Still, in those final moments before the ship's fate was sealed, many aboard refused to give up hope, believing that rescue lights might appear over the horizon at any moment. The final lifeboats disappeared into the darkness, leaving hundreds of people still standing on the decks of the Titanic. The cold had become almost unbearable. The temperature was well below freezing, and the icy wind swept across the ship without mercy. Those who remained searched the horizon again and again, hoping to see the lights of a rescue vessel. Yet the Atlantic stretched endlessly into the darkness, silent except for the sounds of the dying ship. Water continued pouring into the lower decks, causing the bow to sink even faster. Furniture began sliding across elegant rooms that only hours earlier had been filled with laughter and conversation. In some hallways, seawater rushed through open doorways, climbing staircases that had once been admired as masterpieces of design. The magnificent grand staircase, illuminated by electric lights, stood almost unchanged for a few final moments before the freezing ocean slowly reached it as well. Captain Edward Smith continued moving across the ship, encouraging the crew to carry out their duties until the very end. Around him, officers worked tirelessly to keep order, despite knowing that almost every lifeboat had already gone. Some passengers quietly accepted their fate, choosing to remain together with family members rather than become separated during the final minutes. Others continued searching for any possible way to survive. Below deck, the engineers remained at their posts until electricity could no longer be maintained. Thanks to their sacrifice, the light stayed on much longer than many expected, allowing people to move through the ship without complete darkness surrounding them. Then, shortly after 2 in the morning, the power finally began to fail. One by one, sections of the ship fell into darkness before the brilliant electric lights suddenly disappeared altogether. For a brief moment, only the stars above and the faint glow of the night sky illuminated the enormous liner. As more water flooded the bow, the stern rose dramatically higher above the Atlantic. People struggled to keep their footing on the sharply sloping decks. Loose chairs, equipment, and other objects slid toward the ocean as gravity pulled everything forward. Deep within the ship, enormous forces twisted the steel structure beyond its limits. Witnesses later described hearing terrifying groans and thunderous cracking sounds echoing through the hull. Then came the moment the world would never forget. Under unimaginable stress, the Titanic broke apart. The forward section disappeared beneath the freezing Atlantic first, while the stern remained briefly above the surface before beginning its own final descent. Within only a few more moments, the great ship that had once been called unsinkable vanished beneath the dark ocean, leaving behind only scattered debris, lifeboats filled with survivors, and hundreds of voices calling for help across the freezing sea. For several long, heartbreaking minutes after the Titanic disappeared beneath the surface, the Atlantic Ocean was filled with desperate cries for help. Hundreds of people struggled in the freezing water, where the temperature was so cold that survival became a race against time. Many wore life jackets, but the icy sea quickly drained the warmth from their bodies. Those inside the lifeboats listened in silence, hearing voices echo across the darkness. Some passengers begged the officers to return and rescue more people, while others feared that rowing back immediately might cause the overloaded boats to capsize if too many swimmers reached them at once. It was an impossible decision, one that survivors remembered for the rest of their lives. Gradually, the voices became fewer and quieter until the vast Atlantic returned to an almost unbelievable silence. The stars still shone overhead as if nothing had happened, while small lifeboats drifted across a sea now covered with floating pieces of wood, furniture, luggage, and fragments of the magnificent ship. Families searched anxiously from one lifeboat to another, calling the names of husbands, wives, parents, children, and friends, hoping someone would answer. In many cases, no reply ever came. Several hours later, as dawn slowly approached, the first pale light appeared on the eastern horizon. The sunrise revealed the full scale of the tragedy. Icebergs surrounded the area, standing quietly above the calm ocean, while countless pieces of wreckage floated across the water. Survivors, exhausted and freezing, wrapped themselves in blankets and waited patiently for help to arrive. Then, just after sunrise, a distant plume of smoke appeared. It belonged to the RMS Carpathia, which had traveled through dangerous ice fields at full speed after receiving the Titanic's distress signals. As the rescue ship drew closer, relief spread through the lifeboats. Crew members aboard the Carpathia lowered ropes and carefully helped survivors climb aboard. Many were too weak to stand on their own after spending hours in the bitter cold. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers immediately offered blankets, hot drinks, food, and medical care. Some survivors broke into tears as they stepped onto the safety of the rescue ship, while others stood silently, staring back toward the empty ocean where the Titanic had disappeared only hours before. As the Carpathia prepared to continue toward New York, officers began counting those rescued. Out of more than 2,200 people who had sailed aboard the Titanic, only about 700 survived. More than 1,500 lives had been lost in one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in history. The tragedy shocked the entire world, and newspapers across countless countries carried the story on their front pages, ensuring that the name Titanic would never be forgotten. The Carpathia continued its voyage towards New York, carrying the survivors of the disaster. Although everyone aboard was grateful to be alive, the atmosphere was filled with sadness rather than celebration. Blankets covered tired shoulders, doctors treated injuries caused by the freezing cold, and volunteers quietly served hot tea, coffee, soup, and bread to people who had endured the longest night of their lives. Many survivors sat silently, unable to believe everything they had witnessed only hours earlier. Others searched the passenger lists posted around the ship, desperately hoping the names of missing relatives would somehow appear among those rescued. As the days passed, stories of extraordinary courage began spreading from one survivor to another. Crew members who had remained at their posts until the very end were remembered with deep respect. The engineers who kept the electricity running allowed the lights and wireless equipment to operate far longer than expected, giving many passengers valuable extra time to reach the lifeboats. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, continued sending distress calls almost until the last possible moment, helping ensure that the Carpathia knew exactly where to sail. Their determination became one of the greatest examples of duty in maritime history. Newspapers around the world published countless eyewitness accounts after the survivors reached land. Some described the incredible luxury of the Titanic before the collision, while others spoke about the silence that followed the sinking, saying it was a sound they would remember for the rest of their lives. Reporters gathered at the docks, photographing exhausted survivors as they stepped onto solid ground. Families waited anxiously, hoping to reunite with loved ones, while many received heartbreaking confirmation that someone they cherished would never return home. Governments quickly launched official investigations to understand how such a modern ship could have been lost on its very first voyage. Witnesses testified about the shortage of lifeboats, the ice warnings received during the voyage, the speed maintained through dangerous waters, and the decisions made during the evacuation. Although different opinions emerged on certain details, one conclusion became clear. The tragedy revealed serious weaknesses in international maritime safety. As a result, important changes followed. Passenger ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Emergency drills became more carefully organized, and continuous wireless radio watches were Introduced so distress calls would never again go unanswered during the night. International patrols also began monitoring the North Atlantic ice fields each year, warning ships about dangerous ice before they entered those waters. More than a century has now passed since the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, yet its story continues to captivate millions of people. Not simply because a magnificent ship was lost, but because it reminds us of human ambition, courage, sacrifice, and the importance of learning from tragedy. So future generations can travel the seas more safely than ever before. In the decades that followed, the Titanic became far more than the story of a single ship. It became a symbol remembered across generations, inspiring books, documentaries, museums, and scientific expedition. For many years, however, one mystery remained unanswered. No one knew the exact location where the great liner rested beneath the Atlantic. Survivors could describe the terrible night in remarkable detail, but the ocean kept the ship itself hidden, thousands of meters below the surface, where sunlight could never reach. The wreck lay undisturbed in complete darkness. Powerful ocean currents slowly covered parts of the ship with rust and sea life, while countless personal belongings remained scattered across the seabed exactly where they had fallen in. 1912, decades passed before technology became advanced enough to search those extreme depths. Finally, in 1985, an international expedition led by explorer Robert Ballard discovered the Titanic, resting nearly 4 kilometers beneath the ocean's surface. The discovery amazed the world. Cameras revealed that the ship had broken into 2 major sections before reaching the bottom, confirming what many survivors had believed. The famous bow still stood recognizable despite decades underwater, while the stern showed extensive damage caused by the violent descent to the ocean floor. Explorers also found dishes, shoes, luggage, bottles, and many other everyday objects, silent reminders of the thousands of lives forever connected to the tragedy. These discoveries helped historians better understand the ship's final moments, but they also raised important ethical questions. Many believed the wreck should remain untouched because it served as the final resting place for more than 1,500 people. Others argued that carefully studying the site could preserve valuable historical information before the ocean slowly destroyed it forever. Even today, that discussion continues among historians, scientists, governments, and the families of those who sailed aboard the Titanic. Nature itself is gradually changing the wreck. Tiny iron-eating bacteria slowly consume the steel, creating fragile rust formations that eventually collapse into fine particles. Experts believe that one day, much of the ship may disappear completely, leaving only memories, photographs, and historical records behind. Although the physical vessel will not last forever, its story almost certainly will. Every generation continues to learn about the courage shown by passengers and crew, the lessons that transformed maritime safety, and the reminder that even humanity's greatest achievements must always respect the power of nature. More than a century after the disaster, the name Titanic still carries a unique place in history, reminding us that behind every famous event are ordinary people with hopes, dreams, families, and futures that were forever changed during one cold April night on the Atlantic Ocean. As historians continued studying the Titanic, they realized that the disaster was not caused by a single mistake, but by a chain of unfortunate circumstances. The ship had struck an iceberg, yet many other factors influenced what happened afterward. The calm sea made ice harder to spot, the moonless night reduced visibility, and the shortage of lifeboats meant there was not enough room for everyone on board. Each detail, when examined separately, seemed small, but together they changed history forever. These lessons were carefully recorded so future generations of sailors, engineers, and shipbuilders could avoid repeating the same tragedy. Today, every modern passenger ship follows safety rules that were strengthened because of what happened in 1912, lifeboat capacity, emergency training, constant radio communication, and international ice patrols all became part of everyday maritime operations. Millions of people have crossed the Atlantic, safely thanks in part to the painful lessons learned from the Titanic. Yet beyond engineering and regulations, the story continues to touch people because of its deeply human moments. Accounts tell of strangers helping one another without expecting anything in return, parents placing their children's safety above their own, and crew members continuing their duties even when they understood they might never survive. These acts of courage transformed the disaster into more than a historical event. They became examples of compassion during unimaginable circumstances. Museums around the world now preserve letters, clothing, photographs, tickets, and personal belongings recovered from the wreck or donated by survivors' families. Looking at these ordinary objects reminds visitors that every suitcase belonged to someone with dreams, every photograph captured a real family, and every ticket represented a hopeful journey toward a new future. For many descendants, the Titanic is not simply a famous ship, but part of their own family history. Some continue researching relatives who sailed aboard, discovering stories that had been passed down through generations. Even after more than a century, new documents, photographs, and personal diaries occasionally emerge, adding small but valuable pieces to the larger story. Historians continue comparing eyewitness accounts, official reports, and modern scientific research to understand the disaster as accurately as possible. Although certain details may always remain uncertain beneath the Atlantic, the overall story has endured through time with remarkable clarity. The Titanic reminds us that progress and confidence should always be matched with humility, preparation, and respect for nature. It also reminds us that history is remembered, not only because of great ships or famous names, but because of the ordinary people whose lives, hopes, and acts of courage became part of an unforgettable chapter in the story of the world. Although the Titanic's voyage lasted only a few days, its legacy has lasted for more than a century. Every year, historians, engineers, divers, writers, and visitors continue returning to its story, each hoping to understand not only how the disaster happened, but why it continues to capture the imagination of people around the world. Part of the answer lies in the remarkable contrast between confidence and reality. The Titanic was introduced as one of the safest and most advanced ships ever built, representing the height of human innovation. Yet nature reminded everyone that even the greatest achievements require caution, preparation, and respect. The disaster became a turning point in maritime history because it inspired lasting improvements that continue protecting passengers today. Modern ships carry advanced radar systems, capable of detecting obstacles far beyond the range of human eyesight. Satellite communications allow vessels to remain in constant contact with rescue services and nearby ships, while sophisticated navigation technology provides accurate positioning every moment of a voyage. Weather forecasts and ice reports are shared almost instantly across the world, giving captains information that simply did not exist in 1912. Every emergency drill practiced aboard today's cruise ships reflects lessons first learned through a painful experience more than a century ago. Yet despite all these technological advances, the Titanic is remembered most for its people rather than its machinery. Families separated during the evacuation, crew members who remained at their posts, musicians who continued playing to comfort frightened passengers, wireless operators who never stopped sending distress calls, and rescuers who raced through dangerous ice fields all became part of a story that continues to inspire respect and reflection. The names of many passengers are still read during memorial ceremonies held each April, ensuring they are remembered not simply as victims of a famous disaster, but as individuals whose lives mattered deeply to those who loved them. Across the world, museums display carefully preserved artifacts that connect visitors with that extraordinary voyage. A pocket watch stopped at the moment icy water reached it, a handwritten letter never delivered, a pair of children's shoes, and a simple boarding ticket, all remind us that history is made not only of great events, but of ordinary moments, shared by ordinary people. Standing before these objects, it becomes easier to imagine the excitement felt on the morning the Titanic departed Southampton and the uncertainty that followed only days later. More than 100 years have passed since that unforgettable April night. Yet the Titanic continues sailing through history, not across the Atlantic Ocean, but through books, museums, documentaries, and the memories of millions who continue telling its story. It remains a timeless reminder that courage, compassion, and the willingness to learn from tragedy are among humanity's greatest strengths, ensuring that the lessons of the Titanic will never truly sink beneath the waves. Over time, the Titanic came to represent something even greater than a maritime disaster. It became a reminder that every person aboard had a unique story long before stepping onto the ship. Some passengers had spent years saving enough money for a third-class ticket, hoping to begin a new life in America. Others were returning home after business trips across Europe. While wealthy families viewed the voyage as another comfortable crossing of the Atlantic, children carried small toys packed carefully into their luggage. Newly married couples dreamed about their future together, and elderly travelers looked forward to seeing relatives they had not embraced for many years. None of them imagined that their names would one day become part of history. Historians continue discovering letters, diaries, postcards, and official records that reveal these personal stories in remarkable detail. A short message written before departure, a family photograph tucked inside a suitcase, or a ticket preserved for generations can tell us more about the people aboard than statistics ever could. These small pieces of history remind us that the Titanic was not simply a ship made of steel, wood, and engines. It was a temporary home for thousands of ordinary lives, each filled with hopes, fears, ambitions, and dreams. Today, descendants of passengers still share family memories passed down through generations. Some preserve treasured photographs, while others keep letters written shortly before the voyage began. Their stories allow modern researchers to better understand what daily life aboard the Titanic was truly like. Museums around the world carefully protect these precious artifacts, knowing that each object connects us directly with a real human life from more than a century ago. Even after decades of research, new discoveries continue to appear. Forgotten photographs are sometimes found in family collections. Previously unknown documents emerge from archives, and improved technology allows scientists to study the wreck without disturbing it. Every new expedition adds another small piece to the puzzle, helping historians answer questions that have remained unsolved for generations. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson of the Titanic has never changed. Progress alone cannot guarantee safety. Confidence must always be balanced with preparation, responsibility, and respect for the unpredictable power of nature. At the same time, the tragedy reminds us that kindness often shines brightest during humanity's darkest moments. The courage shown by passengers, crew members, engineers, radio operators, and rescuers continues inspiring people around the world, proving that even in the face of overwhelming disaster, compassion and selflessness can leave a legacy far stronger than steel. And as the quiet waters of the North Atlantic continue flowing above the resting place of the Titanic, the story endures, not because of how the voyage ended, but because of the countless lives whose memories continue, sailing through history, reminding future generations never to forget the lessons learned On that cold April night in 1912, as we reach the end of this remarkable journey, it becomes clear that the Titanic is remembered not only because it sank, but because its story continues to connect people across generations. More than 100 years have passed since the ship disappeared beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic, yet its lessons remain as meaningful today as they were in 1912. Every voyage across the world's oceans carries echoes of what was learned that unforgettable night. Modern crews train carefully for emergencies. Ships maintain constant communication with one another, and international rescue systems stand ready around the clock. These improvements were shaped by the sacrifices of those aboard the Titanic, ensuring that future travelers would be safer than those who came before them. For historians, the Titanic is an extraordinary window into the early 20th century. It reveals how people traveled, what they valued, how different social classes lived, and how rapidly technology was changing the world. Walking through recreated cabins in museums or viewing preserved artifacts allows us to imagine the excitement passengers felt when they first stepped aboard. Elegant first-class rooms, comfortable second-class accommodations, and the simpler quarters of third class families all tell different parts of the same story. Together they remind us that, despite differences in wealth or background, everyone ultimately shared the same uncertain fate once the collision occurred. The wreck itself now rests quietly beneath thousands of meters of water, where darkness has remained unbroken for more than a century. Fish swim through silent corridors that once echoed with conversations, music, and footsteps. Rust slowly transforms the steel, and nature continues reclaiming what humanity once believed would last forever. Yet while the ship itself slowly disappears, its history remains alive in classrooms, libraries, documentaries, museums, and conversations like this one. Every generation rediscovers the Titanic, not simply to remember a tragedy, but to better understand resilience, responsibility, and the value of every human life. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy the Titanic leaves behind. It reminds us that history is never only about famous ships or dramatic events. It is about ordinary people whose hopes, courage, kindness, and determination continue inspiring others long after they are gone. The passengers who boarded in Southampton expected only an ordinary voyage across the Atlantic. Instead, they became part of a story that would change maritime history forever. And so, as the cold Atlantic quietly rolls above the resting place of the Titanic, and the stars continue shining over the same waters that witnessed that unforgettable night, the memory of the ship lives on, not through steel or engines, but through the enduring stories of the people who sailed aboard her, ensuring that the Titanic will never truly be forgotten. Thank you for joining this peaceful journey through one of history's most unforgettable stories. I hope it brought you a little closer to the past and perhaps a little closer to a restful night's sleep. Even though the Titanic's physical structure will continue changing beneath the ocean, its place in history is secure. The story reminds us that every great achievement should be matched by careful planning, humility, and respect for the natural world. It also reminds us that courage is often found in ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations, from the engineers who remained below deck to the wireless operators who continued sending distress calls, to the crew who calmly helped passengers into the lifeboats. Countless acts of bravery became part of the Titanic's lasting legacy. Their decisions saved many lives and continue to inspire people more than a century later. Today, whenever a modern passenger ship crosses the North Atlantic, it does so in a world made safer because of the lessons learned in 1912. Ships carry enough lifeboats for everyone. Emergency drills are routine. Radio communications never stop. and captains receive constant updates about weather and sea conditions. Every improvement represents a promise that the sacrifices made aboard the Titanic would not be forgotten. And so, as our journey through this remarkable chapter of history comes to a gentle close, imagine the Atlantic once more. Far below the surface, surrounded by silence and darkness, the remains of the Titanic rest peacefully where they have lain for generations. Above, the waves continue rolling just as they did on that cold April night, while the stars still shine across the same endless sky. Time has moved forward, but the memory of the ship endures, carried not by the ocean, but by the stories people continue to share. Thank you for spending this quiet evening exploring the complete story of the Titanic. I hope this peaceful journey through history has helped your mind slow down and your thoughts become calm. If you enjoyed traveling into the past with me, remember to subscribe so we can discover another fascinating chapter of history together. Until next time, relax, close your eyes, and let the gentle waves of the Atlantic carry you into a peaceful and restful sleep. Even though the Titanic's physical structure will continue changing beneath the ocean, its place in history is secure. The story reminds us that every great achievement should be matched by careful planning, humility, and respect for the natural world. It also reminds us that courage is often found in ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations. From the engineers who remained below deck, to the wireless operators who continued sending distress calls, to the crew who calmly helped passengers into the lifeboats, countless acts of bravery became part of the Titanic's lasting legacy. Their decisions saved many lives and continue to inspire people more than a century later. Today, whenever a modern passenger ship crosses the North Atlantic, it does so in a world made safer because of the lessons learned in 1912. Ships carry enough lifeboats for everyone. Emergency drills are routine. Radio communications never stop. And captains receive constant updates about weather and sea conditions. Every improvement represents a promise that the sacrifices made aboard the Titanic would not be forgotten. And so, as our journey through this remarkable chapter of history comes to a gentle close, imagine the Atlantic once more. Far below the surface, surrounded by silence and darkness, the remains of the Titanic rest peacefully where they have lain for generations. Above, the waves continue rolling just as they did on that cold April night, while the stars still shine across the same endless sky. Time has moved forward, but the memory of the ship endures, carried not by the ocean, but by the stories people continue to share. Thank you for spending this quiet evening exploring the complete story of the Titanic. I hope this peaceful journey through history has helped your mind slow down and your thoughts become calm. If you enjoyed traveling into the past with me, remember to subscribe so we can discover another fascinating chapter of history together. Until next time, relax, close your eyes, and let the gentle waves of the Atlantic carry you into a peaceful and restful sleep. At the same time, historians continue asking new questions about the Titanic. Every expedition, every recovered document, and every personal letter helps paint a clearer picture of life aboard the ship. Even today, researchers compare eyewitness accounts, study original blueprints, and analyze newly scanned photographs, discovering small details that deepen our understanding of one of history's most unforgettable voyages. One of the reasons the Titanic continues to fascinate historians is because nearly every passenger left behind a different perspective of the voyage. A businessman remembered the elegance of the first-class dining room, where every meal was carefully prepared and served with remarkable attention to detail. A young immigrant remembered the excitement of standing on the open deck, watching Europe slowly disappear behind the horizon as America drew closer with every passing mile. A crew member recalled the endless rhythm of work that never stopped, even during the quietest hours of the night. When these memories are placed together, they create a picture far richer than any single photograph ever could. Historians also study the ship itself in extraordinary detail. Original blueprints reveal how thousands of steel plates were joined together with millions of rivets. Engineers continue examining the design, asking how such an advanced vessel could have been so badly damaged by a single iceberg. Modern computer simulations have shown that the collision lasted only a short time, yet it opened several narrow tiers along the hull. Individually, each opening was relatively small, but together they allowed seawater to enter faster than the ship had been designed to withstand. These scientific studies have helped researchers better understand the disaster without changing the bravery shown by those aboard. Another subject that continues attracting attention is the daily routine of life on the Titanic before the collision. Every morning, stewards quietly delivered hot drinks to many first-class cabins before breakfast. Housekeepers polished brass railings until they reflected the sunlight like mirrors. Fresh flowers decorated public rooms. Newspapers were printed on board with the latest wireless news, and passengers could visit the gymnasium, relax in reading rooms, write letters in elegant lounges, or simply watch the endless Atlantic pass by from comfortable deck chairs. Even third-class passengers enjoyed better accommodations than many had ever experienced on land. Their dining rooms served warm meals. Children played together in shared spaces, and families spent evenings singing traditional songs from their home countries while dreaming about the new lives waiting for them across the ocean. These ordinary moments make the story especially powerful because they remind us that, before history remembered the tragedy, the Titanic was simply a ship filled with everyday people living ordinary lives. Researchers believe that preserving these personal stories is just as important as studying the ship itself. Every diary entry, family photograph, ticket stub, and handwritten postcard helps future generations understand not only how the Titanic sailed, but how the people aboard laughed, worked, rested, celebrated, and hoped for brighter futures. With every new discovery, the story becomes a little more complete, revealing details that remained hidden for decades beneath both the ocean and the passage of time. As interest in the Titanic grew throughout the 20th century, museums and archives around the world began collecting anything connected to the famous voyage. Families carefully donated letters, clothing, pocket watches, menus, postcards, and even small personal belongings that had been preserved for generations. Each item, no matter how ordinary it seemed, helped historians understand life aboard the ship in greater detail. A simple boarding ticket revealed where a passenger stayed. A handwritten letter described the excitement of departure. A child's toy reminded visitors that entire families had begun the journey together, believing they were sailing toward a brighter future. Researchers often say that these personal objects tell the emotional side of history in ways official reports never can. The Titanic has also inspired countless scientific studies. Oceanographers have mapped the seabed surrounding the wreck using advanced sonar, creating incredibly detailed images of the ship's resting place. Special underwater robots equipped with powerful cameras carefully explore areas that human divers cannot safely reach because of the extreme depth and crushing water pressure. These robotic expeditions allow experts to observe the wreck without causing unnecessary disturbance. Every mission provides new photographs, showing how the ship continues to change over time as rust. Bacteria and ocean currents slowly reshape what remains. Scientists estimate that the wreck looks noticeably different today than it did when it was first discovered in 1985. Some famous sections have weakened considerably, while others have collapsed entirely under their own weight. This gradual change reminds researchers that the Titanic will not remain, preserved forever. Because of this, digital scanning has become increasingly important. Millions of measurements have been combined to create highly accurate three-dimensional models of the entire wreck. These digital reconstructions allow historians, engineers, and students to explore the ship virtually, examining details that would otherwise remain hidden beneath nearly 4,000 meters of water. At the same time, historians continue comparing these modern discoveries with survivor testimony. In many cases, details described during official inquiries over a century ago have proven remarkably accurate when compared with today's underwater images. This has strengthened confidence in many eyewitness accounts, while also helping resolve long-standing questions about the ship's final moments. Every expedition adds another piece to the puzzle, showing that history is never completely finished. Even after more than 100 years, the Titanic continues revealing new information, encouraging researchers to keep exploring, asking questions, and preserving the memories of everyone who sailed aboard that extraordinary ship. Another fascinating aspect of the Titanic is the people who built her. Long before the ship ever sailed, thousands of workers at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast spent years turning drawings into reality. Riveters stood high above the ground, fastening enormous steel plates together by hand, while carpenters shaped elegant wooden interiors that would later amaze passengers from around the world. Electricians installed miles of wiring throughout the ship. Plumbers connected complex systems of pipes, and painters carefully finished every public room before the vessel was ready for sea. For these workers, the Titanic was not simply a famous ship, but the result of countless hours of skill, patience, and hard labor. Many of them never imagined that the vessel they had helped create would one day become one of history's most recognized ships. The scale of the project was extraordinary for its time. Huge cranes lifted steel weighing many tons, and construction required careful coordination between hundreds of different trades. Every staircase, cabin door, dining table, and engine component had to fit perfectly into place. Even small details received remarkable attention. Decorative wood panels were polished until they shined. Brass fixtures reflected the light beautifully, and luxurious carpets were selected to create an atmosphere of comfort during the Atlantic crossing. When the ship was finally completed, many believed it represented the highest level of engineering and craftsmanship the world had ever seen. Before departing on its maiden voyage, the Titanic successfully completed sea trials, during which experienced officers tested its steering, engines, navigation equipment, and general performance. The results were considered excellent, giving both the company and passengers confidence in the new liner. Looking back today, historians often reflect on the contrast between those hopeful days and the tragedy that later unfolded. Yet they also remind us that no one involved in designing, building, or boarding the Titanic could see the future. To them, it was the beginning of an exciting new chapter in ocean travel, filled with optimism about what modern technology could achieve. Understanding this perspective helps explain why the ship captured the imagination of the entire world even before it left port. It was more than a passenger liner. It was a symbol of a new era, carrying with it the dreams of engineers, workers, crew members, and travelers alike, all believing they were taking part in something truly historic. Beyond the engineering and the famous disaster, the Titanic also reflected the society of the early 20th century. The ship was divided into first, second, and third class, and each section offered a very different experience. First-class passengers enjoyed some of the finest accommodations in the world. Their cabins were decorated in elegant styles inspired by French and English architecture, complete with richly carved furniture, comfortable beds, private sitting rooms, and electric lighting that felt remarkably modern for the time. Meals were served in an impressive dining saloon where guests could enjoy multiple courses, prepared by highly trained chefs. Fresh oysters, roast meats, seasonal vegetables, pastries, and fine desserts appeared on beautifully arranged tables, while attentive waiters ensured every detail met the highest standards of luxury. Second-class passengers experienced a level of comfort that would have been considered first class on many other ships. Their cabins were clean, spacious, and thoughtfully furnished, making long-distance travel far more pleasant than most people expected. Many teachers, ministers, merchants, and middle-class families chose this section because it offered both comfort and affordability. Third-class passengers, although traveling in much simpler accommodations, often found conditions far better than those on older immigrant ships. Cabins were equipped with proper beds instead of crowded, open dormitories. Meals were warm and filling, and common rooms gave families opportunities to gather, sing songs, play cards, or share stories from their homelands. People from Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Italy, and many other countries filled these spaces with different languages and traditions, creating a small international community during the voyage. Children quickly made new friends despite speaking different languages, proving that curiosity often crossed cultural boundaries more easily than adults expected. Throughout the day, passengers explored the decks, admired the endless Atlantic, wrote postcards, read newspapers printed aboard the ship, and attended religious services on Sunday. Others visited the gymnasium, where bicycles, rowing machines, and other exercise equipment represented the latest ideas in physical fitness. Some simply preferred sitting quietly in deck chairs beneath warm blankets, watching seabirds circle above the waves while fresh ocean air filled the horizon. Looking back today, these peaceful scenes remind historians that for most of its voyage, the Titanic was exactly what its builders intended it to be, a magnificent floating city carrying thousands of ordinary people across the Atlantic in comfort, hope, and anticipation, completely unaware that history was slowly approaching from beyond the dark horizon. Another remarkable feature of the Titanic was how carefully every part of daily life had been planned. The ship functioned almost like a small floating city, with hundreds of crew members working around the clock to ensure everything operated smoothly. Bakers woke long before sunrise to prepare fresh bread, rolls, and pastries for breakfast. In enormous kitchens, cooks organized thousands of ingredients, carefully timing each meal so it would be served hot despite the vast distance between the galley and the dining rooms. Laundry workers washed and pressed clothing throughout the voyage, while cleaners quietly polished corridors before most passengers had even left their cabins. Behind the elegant public spaces was an invisible workforce whose efforts allowed guests to enjoy a comfortable crossing without ever seeing the tremendous amount of work taking place below deck. Communication aboard the ship was equally impressive for its era. The Titanic carried a powerful wireless telegraph system that allowed operators to send and receive messages across great distances. Wealthy passengers often paid to send personal telegrams to family members or business associates on shore, letting them know about their journey while still in the middle of the Atlantic. The wireless room remained busy for much of the day, handling both private messages and important navigational information exchanged with other ships. At the time, this technology seemed almost magical. Only a few decades earlier, communicating across an ocean without cables would have been unimaginable. Yet aboard the Titanic, it had already become part of everyday life. Entertainment was also an important part of the voyage. In the evenings, passengers gathered in lounges to listen to live music performed by talented musicians. Others played cards, discussed current events, or read novels while relaxing in comfortable chairs beside large windows overlooking the sea. During pleasant weather, people spent hours walking the promenade deck, enjoying the fresh ocean breeze and watching the changing colors of the Atlantic as the sun slowly moved across the sky. Some travelers kept personal journals describing each day of the voyage, recording small details such as the weather, the meals they enjoyed, the people they met, and the excitement of traveling aboard the world's newest ocean liner. These journals have become valuable historical records, allowing modern readers to experience the voyage through the eyes of those who were actually there. They remind us that before the famous collision, the Titanic was filled with countless ordinary moments: morning, conversations over breakfast, children laughing on deck, families posing for photographs, and travelers dreaming about the future waiting for them in America. Those quiet memories remain just as important as the dramatic events that later made the ship famous, helping historians understand not only how the unwind Titanic was lost, but also how it was lived in during those unforgettable days at sea. As the voyage continued, the crew followed a carefully organized schedule that rarely changed. Every department aboard the Titanic had its own responsibilities, and thousands of small tasks had to be completed each day to keep the ship running smoothly. Officers on the bridge rotated through watches, carefully observing the weather, the sea, and the ship's course. Quartermasters stood at the great wooden wheel, making small adjustments whenever the officer of the watch gave an order. Below them, engineers constantly checked pressure gauges, steam lines, and the enormous reciprocating engines that powered the ship across the Atlantic. Every sound mattered. Experienced engineers could often recognize the condition of a machine simply by listening to its rhythm, noticing even the slightest change before it became a serious problem. Deep inside the boiler rooms, teams of firemen worked in exhausting heat that contrasted sharply with the cool air on the upper decks. Using heavy shovels, they fed coal into the roaring furnaces hour after hour, ensuring that enough steam was produced to keep the engines operating efficiently. Coal trimmers moved fresh coal through narrow passageways so the firemen would never run short of fuel. It was difficult, dirty work, yet few passengers ever thought about the hundreds of men whose labor kept the magnificent liner moving. Above deck, however, life seemed effortless. Morning sunlight reflected brilliantly from the polished white paint covering the ship's exterior. Stewards arranged comfortable deck chairs for passengers who wished to relax beneath blankets while breathing the fresh Atlantic air. Some travelers spent hours watching dolphins appear alongside the ship before disappearing beneath the waves again. Others enjoyed long conversations with new friends they had met only days earlier, exchanging stories about their hometowns, families, and hopes for the future. Photographers captured elegant portraits on the open decks, never imagining those photographs would become treasured historical records more than a century later. In the afternoons, many passengers visited the famous Grand Staircase, one of the Titanic's most admired features. Sunlight poured through its beautiful glass dome, illuminating carved oak railings, decorative ironwork, and the magnificent clock that overlooked the landing. Guests paused there to admire the craftsmanship or simply to meet before dinner. For many, it became the heart of the ship, a place where people from different backgrounds briefly crossed paths before continuing to their own parts of the vessel. Looking back today, these peaceful scenes remind us that history is often built from ordinary moments. Before the Titanic became known around the world for its tragic end, it was filled with simple routines, friendly conversations, shared meals, quiet laughter, and thousands of everyday experiences that unfolded as naturally as they would in any small town, floating steadily across the vast Atlantic toward a future that still seemed full of promise. As evening approached on each day of the voyage, the atmosphere aboard the Titanic changed in subtle but memorable ways. The bright activity of the afternoon slowly gave way to a quieter elegance as passengers returned to their cabins to prepare for dinner. Stewards carefully pressed jackets, polished shoes, and delivered fresh towels, while cabin attendants ensured every room was neat before guests returned. In first class, ladies selected beautiful gowns and gentlemen dressed in formal evening wear, reflecting the customs of the Edwardian era when dinner aboard a great ocean liner was considered one of the highlights of the day. The grand dining saloon gradually filled with conversation, the gentle sound of silver cutlery, and the soft glow of hundreds of electric lights. Menus changed daily, offering a remarkable variety of dishes, prepared by experienced chefs who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Fresh fish, roasted meats, vegetables, soups, desserts, and carefully selected wines were served with impressive precision. At nearby tables, strangers often became friends during the long voyage, discussing travel, business, politics, literature, and the exciting future that seemed to await the modern world. Meanwhile, second and third class passengers also gathered for their evening meals, enjoying simpler but satisfying food while sharing stories from their own lives. After dinner, many travelers preferred taking a slow walk along the promenade deck. The cool Atlantic breeze carried the scent of salt water as the ship continued steadily westward. Couples leaned against the railings, watching the sunset paint the horizon with shades of orange, pink, and deep blue before darkness slowly settled over the sea. Others chose to remain indoors, listening to music performed by the ship's talented orchestra, or reading books borrowed from the library. Some passengers wrote detailed journal entries before going to bed, carefully recording each day's experiences so they could remember the voyage forever. These diaries later became invaluable historical sources, describing not only the famous disaster, but also the peaceful routine that came before it. They tell us about friendly conversations, children's games, impressive meals, quiet evenings, and the excitement of traveling aboard what many believed was the greatest passenger ship ever constructed. Reading these personal accounts today allows historians to experience the voyage through the eyes of ordinary people rather than through headlines alone. It reminds us that the Titanic's story was made up of thousands of individual moments, each one ordinary at the time, yet together forming one of the most carefully documented journeys in maritime history. While first-class passengers often attracted the most attention in newspapers of the time, historians have increasingly focused on the experiences of second and third-class travelers because they represented the majority of those aboard. Many third-class passengers had sold nearly everything they owned to afford the journey across the Atlantic. Entire families traveled together with only a few carefully packed suitcases containing clothing, family photographs, treasured books, or small keepsakes that reminded them of home. Some hoped to reunite with relatives who had already settled in America, while others planned to begin completely new lives in unfamiliar cities where opportunity seemed greater than anything they had known before. Despite the uncertainty that awaited them, there was also a remarkable sense of optimism. Children explored the corridors with endless curiosity, making friends even when they spoke different languages. Laughter echoed through common rooms as musicians occasionally played traditional songs from Ireland, Scandinavia, Italy, and Eastern Europe. In the evenings, families gathered to share stories about the places they had left behind and the futures they imagined beyond the Atlantic. Second-class passengers enjoyed a quieter atmosphere. Teachers, ministers, engineers, merchants, and professionals often spent their time reading newspapers, discussing current events, or walking the open decks while watching seabirds glide effortlessly above the waves. Many considered the accommodations exceptionally comfortable, remarking that few hotels on land could offer such clean cabins, attentive service, and reliable meals during a long journey. Across every section of the ship, one thing remained the same: the endless presence of the ocean. Day after day, passengers awoke to the gentle movement of the ship and looked out upon an uninterrupted horizon where sea and sky seemed to meet. Some described the Atlantic as peaceful beyond imagination, while others admitted that its vastness inspired both wonder and humility. At night, when the engines settled into their steady rhythm and conversations gradually faded, many stood quietly beneath the stars, amazed by the brilliance of the moonless sky far away from the lights of any city. These simple moments, preserved in letters and journals, remind us that before history remembered the Titanic for tragedy, thousands of ordinary people experienced days filled with hope, curiosity, friendship, and quiet anticipation. As they sailed toward a future they believed was only a few peaceful days away. Not every remarkable story aboard the Titanic took place in the grand dining rooms or along the famous staircase. Many unfolded quietly behind closed doors, where ordinary routines continued almost unnoticed. Early each morning, stewards walked through the corridors carrying hot water, tea, coffee, and breakfast trays to passengers who preferred dining in their cabins. Housekeepers carefully straightened blankets, polished mirrors, and opened curtains to let the morning sunlight fill the rooms. In the kitchens, enormous ovens baked fresh bread, while chefs prepared hundreds of breakfasts with astonishing speed. Eggs, porridge, smoked fish, fruit, and pastries were arranged with remarkable precision, reflecting the high standards expected aboard one of the world's finest ocean liners. Nearby, waiters organized dining tables before guests arrived, checking every glass, plate, and piece of silverware. Down in the mailroom, postal clerks sorted thousands of letters that passengers hoped would soon reach family and friends across the Atlantic. Few people realized that the Titanic even had its own post office, staffed by workers whose responsibility was to process mail throughout the voyage. Bags filled with postcards, business correspondence, and personal letters waited to be delivered after reaching New York. For many passengers, writing letters became part of their daily routine. They described the beauty of the ship, the kindness of the crew, the delicious meals, and the endless blue ocean stretching beyond every window. Those letters remain valuable, historical records today because they captured the excitement of the voyage before tragedy changed everything. Outside, sailors performed constant maintenance despite the calm weather. They inspected ropes, cleaned the decks, checked lifeboat equipment, and made sure every part of the ship remained in excellent condition. Although passengers rarely noticed these quiet tasks, they were essential to keeping such a massive vessel operating efficiently. Meanwhile, officers carefully recorded the ship's position using navigational instruments, comparing observations of the sun and stars with charts spread across the bridge. Every measurement helped confirm the Titanic's progress across the Atlantic. Looking back, these peaceful routines reveal how normal life felt during those first days at sea. The ship functioned exactly as its designers intended, filled with ordinary conversations, familiar responsibilities, and hopeful expectations. It is these everyday moments, preserved through journals, letters, and official records, that allow historians to understand the Titanic not only as a famous disaster but also as a living community that existed, however briefly, upon the open ocean. As the Titanic moved farther into the Atlantic, its officers relied on a combination of experience, discipline, and traditional navigation techniques that had guided ocean liners for generations. Although the ship carried advanced technology for its time, navigation still depended heavily on careful observation and constant attention. During daylight, officers measured the position of the sun using precision instruments, comparing their calculations with detailed nautical charts. At night, when weather permitted, the stars became equally important. Experienced navigators could determine the ship's approximate position by studying familiar constellations that had guided sailors across the oceans for centuries. Every calculation was carefully recorded in the ship's logbook, creating a detailed record of the voyage hour by hour. On the bridge, officers remained alert throughout every watch. They monitored the compass, checked the ship's heading, observed changing weather conditions, and communicated regularly with lookouts stationed high above in the crow's nest. These lookouts spent long hours scanning the horizon, searching for ships, floating debris, changes in the sea, or anything else that might require attention. Their task demanded extraordinary concentration, because even a brief moment of distraction could allow an object ahead to go unnoticed. Life on the bridge followed a strict routine built upon discipline, rather than excitement. Orders were given clearly, repeated to confirm they had been understood, and then carried out with precision. This routine helped ensure that every member of the crew understood exactly what was expected, regardless of the weather or time of day. Meanwhile, passengers rarely considered the complex work taking place above and below them. They saw only the smooth progress of the voyage, the gentle movement of the ship, and the endless ocean stretching toward the horizon. Many spent afternoons reading books beside large windows, while others relaxed in deck chairs wrapped in warm blankets, listening to the distant rhythm of the engines beneath their feet. Children continued inventing games along the open decks, occasionally stopping to wave at seabirds following the ship. For them, the Atlantic felt peaceful and almost magical. Looking back through diaries and personal letters, historians often notice how frequently passengers described the voyage as calm, comfortable, and surprisingly relaxing. These descriptions provide an important reminder that for most people aboard, the Titanic was exactly what it appeared to be, a magnificent ocean liner carrying them safely across the sea. Only with the knowledge of history do we recognize how precious those ordinary hours truly were, when daily routines continued without fear and the future still seemed as wide and hopeful as the Atlantic itself. Away from the public rooms, the Titanic also carried an enormous amount of cargo that many passengers never thought about. Deep inside the ship were thousands of bags of mail, valuable packages, machinery parts, textiles, food supplies, and personal luggage belonging to people from many different countries. Special refrigerated storage rooms kept fresh meat, dairy products, vegetables, and fruit cool throughout the voyage, allowing chefs to prepare meals of exceptional quality. Even several days after leaving port, large storerooms held flour, sugar, coffee, tea, spices, and countless other ingredients, carefully organized so the kitchen staff could find everything they needed without delay. Every department followed detailed schedules to ensure supplies lasted for the entire crossing. Even fresh drinking water was managed with remarkable care, while powerful pumps distributed it throughout the ship whenever passengers turned a tap in their cabins. Few people realized how much planning was required to support more than 2,000 passengers and crew members living together in the middle of the Atlantic. The ship even contained workshops where carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and mechanics could repair equipment if something broke during the voyage. If a door hinge became loose, a pipe leaked, or furniture required attention, skilled craftsmen were available almost immediately. In many ways, the Titanic functioned like a small self-contained town, complete with its own specialist responsible for solving everyday problems without assistance from land. Doctors and medical staff also remained ready around the clock in the ship's hospital, treating everything from minor illnesses to small injuries that occasionally occurred during travel. Fortunately, during most of the voyage, their work was routine, allowing passengers to continue enjoying their days without interruption. Looking back through official records, historians are often impressed by just how smoothly such a massive operation functioned. Thousands of individual responsibilities came together almost seamlessly, creating an experience that many passengers later described as remarkably comfortable and well organized. Before the famous collision entered history, the Titanic represented the confidence of an era that believed careful planning, skilled craftsmanship, and modern technology could overcome nearly any challenge placed before them. A belief reflected in nearly every corridor, cabin, workshop, and dining room aboard the magnificent liner. As the days passed, the weather remained unusually favorable for an Atlantic crossing. The sea was calm, the engines operated with impressive reliability, and passengers settled comfortably into familiar routines. Breakfast was followed by walks along the promenade deck. Afternoons were filled with reading, conversation, or quiet relaxation, and evenings brought elegant dinners followed by music performed by the ship's talented orchestra. For many travelers, the voyage seemed almost timeless, as though the outside world had disappeared beyond the endless horizon. Newspapers printed aboard the Raiders, Titanic kept passengers informed about international events, stock markets, sporting results, and messages received through the wireless telegraph. Some gathered in the smoking room to discuss politics or business, while others preferred quieter corners where they could read novels or simply watch the Atlantic. Through large windows, children continued inventing games throughout the ship, racing along permitted sections of the deck under the watchful eyes of parents and stewards. The crew also found brief moments of normal life between their demanding duties. During breaks, sailors shared tea, engineers exchanged stories from previous voyages, and stewards rested before returning to long hours of assisting passengers. Many crew members had spent years working aboard ocean liners and considered life at sea completely ordinary. They knew the routine so well that nearly every task became second nature. Every bell marking the passing hours, every shift change, and every scheduled inspection occurred with remarkable precision. This steady rhythm gave the impression that the Titanic would continue crossing the Atlantic exactly as planned. Looking back today, historians often emphasize these quiet, uneventful moments because they reveal how peaceful the voyage truly felt before history took its unexpected turn. Most passengers did not spend their days worrying about danger. Instead, they admired the ship's comfort, enjoyed conversations with new friends, planned future business opportunities, or dreamed about reuniting with loved ones waiting in America. The confidence felt aboard the Titanic reflected the optimism of an era that believed technology and progress could overcome almost any obstacle. It is this contrast between ordinary daily life and the extraordinary events that later followed which makes the story so compelling, even after more than a century. By understanding how calm and hopeful those days were, we gain a deeper appreciation for the people aboard, not simply as names connected to a famous disaster, but as ordinary travelers living through what they believed would be another peaceful voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. One subject that often surprises modern readers is how international the Titanic truly was. Although the ship sailed under the British flag, the people aboard represented dozens of different nationalities, languages, and cultures. Crew members came from many parts of the United Kingdom and Ireland, while passengers arrived from across Europe, North America, and beyond. Walking through the corridors, it was possible to hear English, Irish, Gaelic, Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, German, French, Italian, and several Eastern European languages spoken throughout the day. For many immigrants in third class, this was the first time they had met people from so many different countries in one place. Children quickly made friends despite language barriers, proving that curiosity and kindness often communicated more effectively than words alone. During meals, families exchanged stories about their hometowns, traditional foods, and hopes for the future awaiting them across the Atlantic. Some dreamed of opening small businesses, Others planned to work on farms or in growing American cities, while many simply wished to provide better opportunities for their children than had been possible in their homelands. Historians studying passenger records have discovered that the Titanic carried people from remarkably diverse backgrounds. Wealthy industrialists traveled alongside teachers, musicians, craftsmen, farmers, students, servants, and laborers. Although social classes determined where passengers slept and dined, everyone shared the same ocean, the same fresh sea air, and the same anticipation of reaching New York. Throughout the voyage, small moments of friendship developed naturally. A conversation begun during a walk on deck might continue over dinner the following evening. Children who met while exploring the ship often spent hours together playing simple games, while adults exchanged addresses, promising to remain in contact after arriving in America. Some passengers even celebrated birthdays or anniversaries during the voyage, creating happy memories they expected to remember for the rest of their lives. These personal stories remind us that before history remembered the Titanic as a tragedy, it was also a place where strangers became friends. Families dreamed about the future, and thousands of ordinary lives briefly came together aboard one extraordinary ship making its way across the endless Atlantic. Among the many remarkable spaces aboard the Titanic, perhaps none attracted more admiration than the ship's public rooms. Designers wanted passengers to feel as though they were visiting one of Europe's finest hotels rather than crossing an ocean. The famous first-class lounge featured comfortable armchairs, polished wooden walls, elegant fireplaces, and large windows that filled the room with natural light during the day. Nearby, the reading and writing room provided a peaceful place where guests could relax with books, newspapers, or personal letters. Many passengers spent quiet afternoons there, writing postcards to friends and family, carefully describing the beauty of the voyage. While the Atlantic rolled gently outside the windows, the grand staircase remained the heart of the ship. Travelers frequently arranged to meet beneath its beautifully carved clock before dinner or an evening concert. Its polished oak railings, decorative ironwork, and magnificent glass dome created an atmosphere that visitors often described as unforgettable. Photographers occasionally captured portraits there, preserving moments that would later become treasured family memories. Elsewhere aboard the ship, the Turkish bath offered warm steam, rooms and relaxing treatments inspired by luxury spas of the era. There was also a swimming pool, squash court, barber shop, and even an electric elevator, a feature still considered impressive in 1912. These amenities demonstrated how determined the ship's designers were to provide an experience unlike any previous Atlantic crossing. Meanwhile, outside on the promenade deck, another kind of luxury awaited passengers. Comfortable deck chairs faced the endless sea, allowing travelers to spend hours simply watching the waves rise and fall beneath the changing sky. Some wrapped themselves in blankets against the cool ocean breeze, while reading novels or discussing world events with companions. Others remained silent, appreciating the peaceful rhythm of the engines and the distant cries of seabirds that occasionally followed the ship. Sunset became one of the day's most anticipated moments. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the western horizon, the Atlantic transformed into brilliant shades of gold, orange and crimson before fading into deep blue. Many passengers paused whatever they were doing simply to admire the view, unaware they were witnessing one of the final peaceful evenings of the voyage. Historians often emphasize these ordinary experiences because they reveal what life aboard the Titanic truly felt like before disaster struck. It was not a ship defined only by its tragic ending, but also by days filled with comfort, curiosity, friendship, elegant surroundings, and the quiet optimism shared by thousands of people who believed they were traveling safely toward a promising new beginning across the Atlantic. Beyond its elegant appearance, the Titanic was also a remarkable achievement of organization. Every hour of the day followed a carefully planned schedule designed to keep the enormous ship operating efficiently while making passengers feel completely at ease. Before dawn, cooks were already preparing breakfast. Bakers filled ovens with fresh bread, and stewards quietly began their morning rounds. Engineers checked boilers and machinery, while officers reviewed weather, reports, and navigational observations before another day at sea officially began. By the time most passengers awoke, hundreds of crew members had already been working for several hours behind the scenes. After breakfast, the ship came alive with activity. Some passengers preferred a leisurely stroll along the boat deck, enjoying the crisp Atlantic air while wrapped in heavy coats. Others visited the reading room, where shelves held books, magazines, and newspapers received through the wireless telegraph. Businessmen gathered in the smoking room to discuss finance and international affairs, while families explored different parts of the ship together. Children looked over the railings hoping to spot dolphins or seabirds, cheering whenever they saw movement in the waves below. Even something as simple as watching the endless ocean could occupy people for hours. The Atlantic changed constantly. At times, the water appeared deep blue beneath bright sunshine, while later it reflected silver clouds drifting across the sky. Every sunrise and sunset painted the horizon differently, giving passengers the feeling that no 2 days at sea were exactly alike. Crew members often noticed these changes without interrupting their duties, appreciating the beauty of the ocean even as they continued polishing railings, inspecting lifeboats, cleaning decks, and maintaining the ship. During the afternoon, many passengers gathered for tea, one of the most popular traditions aboard British ocean liners. Elegant tables were arranged with fine china, cakes, sandwiches, and warm drinks served by attentive stewards. Conversations flowed easily as strangers became friends over the course of several days. Some exchanged addresses, promising to visit one another after reaching America, while others simply enjoyed the rare opportunity to meet people from countries they had never visited. In the evenings, music once again drifted through the public rooms. The orchestra performed selections that reflected the tastes of the era, creating a relaxed atmosphere that encouraged quiet conversation rather than loud celebration. Looking back through diaries written during the voyage, historians often notice how frequently passengers describe the ship as peaceful, comfortable, and surprisingly ordinary despite its enormous size. That sense of normal daily life is an important part of the Titanic's story because it reminds us that history's most famous events are often surrounded by countless simple moments, shared meals, friendly conversations, gentle walks across polished decks, and ordinary routines that seemed completely unremarkable until they became part of one of the world's most unforgettable voyages. Another fascinating part of the Titanic's story is the enormous amount of planning that took place long before the ship ever left Southampton. Months before departure, passengers reserved cabins. Travel agents arranged tickets. Shipping companies organized cargo, and hundreds of crew members received their assignments. Every department had detailed instructions covering everything, from meal schedules to cleaning, routines, and emergency procedures. Supplying a ship of this size required incredible organization. Thousands of kilograms of food, fresh water, coal, linens, medical supplies, and countless everyday necessities had to be loaded before departure. Records show that the Titanic carried vast quantities of flour, potatoes, meat, butter, eggs, coffee, tea, sugar, fruit, vegetables, and dairy products, enough to feed everyone comfortably throughout the crossing. Bakers worked continuously to provide fresh bread each morning, while butchers, cooks, and kitchen assistants carefully prepared ingredients hours before every meal was served. Hidden beneath the elegant passenger areas was a complex network of storage rooms, cold chambers, workshops, and service corridors that few travelers ever saw. This unseen world allowed the luxurious public spaces above to function effortlessly. Laundry rooms operated almost constantly, washing towels, bed sheets, tablecloths, and uniforms. Electricians inspected lighting systems. Plumbers monitored water pipes, and mechanics maintained pumps, elevators, and ventilation equipment. Every member of the crew understood that even a small mechanical problem could affect thousands of people. So preventive maintenance was an essential part of daily life aboard the ship. Historians studying original company documents have been impressed by the remarkable level of detail involved in managing such a floating city. Every meal served, every cabin cleaned, every ton of coal burned, and every mile traveled across the Atlantic depended upon careful coordination between departments that rarely attracted public attention. Even the disposal of waste, the storage of luggage, and the delivery of passengers' mail followed precise schedules, developed through years of experience in ocean travel. Looking back today, it becomes easier to appreciate why the Titanic represented so much more than a passenger liner. It was an extraordinary example of early 20th century engineering, logistics, hospitality, and teamwork. Thousands of individual tasks came together every single day so smoothly that most passengers hardly noticed the effort taking place around them. They simply enjoyed warm meals, comfortable cabins, friendly service, and peaceful days surrounded by the vast Atlantic, unaware of the countless people working quietly behind the scenes to make every moment of the voyage feel effortless. As the years passed, the Titanic gradually became one of the most carefully documented ships in history. Historians gathered thousands of official records, engineering drawings, passenger lists, crew reports, personal diaries, newspaper articles, and photographs, each revealing another small part of the story. Unlike many ships from the early 20th century, the Titanic left behind an extraordinary amount of information, allowing researchers to reconstruct the voyage with remarkable accuracy. Original blueprints, preserved in archives, continue helping engineers understand exactly how each section of the ship was designed. Passenger manifests reveal not only names and ages, but also occupations, hometowns, destinations, and even cabin numbers. Through these records, historians have been able to trace the lives of hundreds of individuals before and after the voyage, transforming statistics into deeply personal stories. Some families have spent generations researching relatives who traveled aboard the ship, discovering forgotten letters, photographs, and certificates tucked away in old boxes and family albums. These discoveries continue adding new details to the historical record even today. One particularly interesting area of research involves the daily weather conditions experienced during the voyage. Meteorologists have examined historical observations from nearby ships, comparing them with surviving logbooks to recreate the exact atmosphere over the North Atlantic during those April days. Their work confirms that temperatures gradually dropped as the Titanic moved westward, while the sea became increasingly calm. Such calm conditions may have appeared beautiful to passengers enjoying the view from the decks, but experienced sailors understood that unusually smooth water could sometimes make floating ice more difficult to detect because waves no longer broke against its edges. Historians emphasize that this was only one of many factors influencing the voyage, yet it demonstrates how nature can quietly shape history in ways that are not immediately obvious. Researchers have also studied the clothing passengers wore during the crossing. Fashion magazines from 1912, surviving garments, and photographs reveal elegant dresses with wide hats, carefully tailored suits, long overcoats, gloves, polished leather shoes, and formal evening attire that reflected the customs of the Edwardian era. Even children were often dressed in clothing that would seem surprisingly formal by modern standards. These details help historians recreate the atmosphere aboard the ship with remarkable authenticity, allowing museums to display accurate reconstructions of cabins, dining rooms, and public spaces. Every carefully preserved object, from a silver spoon to a handwritten postcard, adds another small piece to the larger picture, helping future generations understand not only how the Titanic sailed across the Atlantic, but also how ordinary life unfolded aboard one of history's most famous ocean liners. The Titanic's legacy also lives on through the countless people who have dedicated their lives to preserving its history. Museum curators, archivists, maritime historians, engineers, and conservation experts work together to ensure that future generations can continue learning about the ship long after the last eyewitnesses have passed away. Around the world, exhibitions display carefully reconstructed cabins, detailed scale models, original artifacts, and interactive maps that allow visitors to follow the Titanic's journey day by day. Many museums have recreated sections of the famous Grand Staircase, first-class cabins, and promenade decks using original construction drawings, giving visitors a rare opportunity to experience the atmosphere that passengers once enjoyed. These reconstructions help transform historical facts into something far more personal, allowing people to imagine what it felt like to walk through the ship during its brief but unforgettable voyage. Modern technology has also changed the way researchers study the Titanic. High-resolution laser scanners and underwater drones now produce incredibly detailed images of the wreck without disturbing it. Engineers combine millions of measurements into precise digital models that can be explored from every angle. These three-dimensional reconstructions reveal details impossible to observe during earlier expeditions, including structural damage, corrosion patterns, and even small objects resting on the seabed. Scientists compare these findings with original engineering documents, allowing them to better understand how the ship responded to the collision and how it has changed during more than a century beneath the Atlantic. Every new expedition contributes valuable information, not because historians expect to completely rewrite the story, but because even the smallest discovery can answer questions that have remained unsolved for decades. Another area of continuing research focuses on the personal experiences of passengers after they reached safety. Survivors often spent years sharing their memories through interviews, letters, memoirs, and public lectures. Some rarely spoke about the disaster again because the memories remained too painful, while others believed it was their responsibility to preserve the truth for future generations. Historians carefully compare these accounts, recognizing that people remembered different details depending on where they were aboard the ship and what they experienced during those unforgettable hours. Together, these testimonies create an extraordinary human record that extends far beyond engineering or navigation. They remind us that the Titanic was not simply a famous vessel, but a place where thousands of individual lives briefly crossed paths, leaving behind stories that continue to educate, inspire, and deepen our understanding of one of history's most remarkable ocean voyages. The Titanic's legacy also lives on through the countless people who have dedicated their lives to preserving its history. Museum curators, archivists, maritime historians, engineers, and conservation experts work together to ensure that future generations can continue learning about the ship long after the last eyewitnesses have passed away. Around the world, exhibitions display carefully reconstructed cabins, detailed scale models, original artifacts, and interactive maps that allow visitors to follow the Titanic's journey day by day. Many museums have recreated sections of the famous Grand Staircase, first-class cabins, and promenade decks using original construction drawings, giving visitors a rare opportunity to experience the atmosphere that passengers once enjoyed. These reconstructions help transform historical facts into something far more personal, allowing people to imagine what it felt like to walk through the ship during its brief but unforgettable voyage. Modern technology has also changed the way researchers study the Titanic. High-resolution laser scanners and underwater drones now produce incredibly detailed images of the wreck without disturbing it. Engineers combine millions of measurements into precise digital models that can be explored from every angle. These three-dimensional reconstructions reveal details impossible to observe during earlier expeditions, including structural damage, corrosion patterns, and even small objects resting on the seabed. Scientists compare these findings with original engineering documents, allowing them to better understand how the ship responded to the collision and how it has changed during more than a century beneath the Atlantic. Every new expedition contributes valuable information, not because historians expect to completely rewrite the story, but because even the smallest discovery can answer questions that have remained unsolved for decades. Another area of continuing research focuses on the personal experiences of passengers after they reached safety. Survivors often spent years sharing their memories through interviews, letters, memoirs, and public lectures. Some rarely spoke about the disaster again because the memories remained too painful, while others believed it was their responsibility to preserve the truth for future generations. Historians carefully compare these accounts, recognizing that people remembered different details depending on where they were aboard the ship and what they experienced during those unforgettable hours. Together, these testimonies create an extraordinary human record that extends far beyond engineering or navigation. They remind us that the Titanic was not simply a famous vessel, but a place where thousands of individual lives briefly crossed paths, leaving behind stories that continue to educate, inspire, and deepen our understanding of one of history's most remarkable ocean voyages. Although more than a century has passed since the Titanic's maiden voyage, its story continues to remind us that history is not made only of great inventions or famous names, but of ordinary people whose lives briefly became part of something extraordinary. Every passenger who stepped aboard carried a different dream. Some hoped to build successful businesses in America. Others longed to reunite with family members after years apart, while many simply searched for a better future than the one they had left behind. Crew members, too, viewed the voyage as another chapter in their professional lives, performing familiar duties with dedication and pride. None of them could have imagined that future generations would study their journey in such remarkable detail. Today, the Titanic remains one of the best-known maritime stories ever told because it speaks to something timeless within human history. It is a story of ambition, confidence, innovation, responsibility, courage, and compassion. It reminds us that technology can achieve incredible things, yet nature always deserves respect. It also reminds us that in moments of uncertainty, the character of ordinary people often shines brighter than any engineering achievement. The calm professionalism shown by many officers, the determination of the engineers who remained at their stations, the perseverance of the wireless operators who continued transmitting distress calls, and the kindness displayed by countless passengers toward strangers have become lasting examples of humanity at its best. As historians continue preserving documents, photographs, personal letters, and eyewitness accounts, the story grows richer with every generation. New research does not replace the old story. Instead, it adds depth, helping us understand not only what happened, but how people experienced those unforgettable days aboard the great liner. Each recovered diary, each family photograph, and each carefully preserved artifact allows another voice from 1912 to be heard once again. The Atlantic Ocean still stretches across the same horizon that the Titanic once crossed. Ships continue sailing those waters every day, guided by modern technology and international safety standards shaped in part by the lessons of that historic voyage. Beneath those waves, the remains of the Titanic rest quietly in darkness, slowly changing with time, while above the surface the memory of the ship continues to travel across generations, through books, museums, documentaries, classrooms, and the curiosity of people around the world. In that way, the voyage never truly ended. It became part of history itself, continuing to teach, inspire, and remind us that every great story is ultimately a collection of countless human lives, each carrying hopes, fears, dreams, and memories that deserve to be remembered.